This is Kino Convo with G-Plex. Follow us on Twitter at G-Plex_MP4 or on Instagram at G-Plex.MP4 or on YouTube at G-Plex. Reagan is way before my time. So though this is historical and should not require a spoiler warning, I will give you a spoiler warning. However, I will also mention that because this was before my time, I don't have that much personal knowledge. I've not done a lot of research on Reagan. A lot of the things in the film, movies, things are told in a very different way in order for the audience to digest it as easily as possible. So it's clear, so you get the story. For a movie that is 2 hours and 15 minutes, it doesn't feel like it because of how fast the pacing is for this movie. I'll get to the spoilers in a minute, but if you know Reagan's story, then the spoiler, it's not really a spoiler because you kind of already know the history. So the movie begins with the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. It is a bit surreal because, these movies are filmed a year, 2 years, sometimes more. Just a few months ago, there was an attempted assassination on President Trump. It is strange how there's so much media kind of happening simultaneously. I guess not so much, but this is the second piece of entertainment that covers an attempted assassination on a president. I don't watch this. There's this show, if you're listening to this, a lot of you have probably watched it. There's this show called The Boys, and apparently they also do an attempted assassination or something about an assassination attempt of some sort. And with this Reagan movie, obviously this really happened and, it was a real life event that occurred. But it is just a little strange that, and within a few months of Trump's attempted assassination, there's also a storyline about it in The Boys within the same week. And then now we're getting this movie about Reagan, who's also had an assassination attempt on his life. There's something uncanny about someone trying to assassinate President Trump, and then it's also in a TV show within the same week. And then we get the same story being told about Ronald Reagan's attempted assassination, all within a few months. Since there was a lot of conflict over nuclear war during and before Reagan's era, there was a heavy element of nuclear war in this movie. And they did showcase a lot of nukes, actually. There was more nukes in this movie than there was in Oppenheimer. That was interesting. I think they even showcased Oppenheimer in a photo in the movie. For a moment, I thought that the first commie, leader, it kind of looked like it was Tommy Lee Jones, but as the movie went on, I was like, okay, that's not Tommy Lee Jones. But it did have a very strong resemblance, whoever the actor was that portrayed that first Communist Party leader. And it's also not strange. In the film, because Ronald Reagan was an actor whose work I'm not really familiar with. I suppose he was in some Westerns, which I watched a lot of Westerns with my grandpa when he was still alive. But I don't recall if we ever watched anything with Ronald Reagan in it. So to be honest, I'm not too familiar with Ronald Reagan's work as an actor. But it was funny how they did show him battling with communists in Hollywood, which is so funny because we still have that same commie problem in Hollywood today. Our biggest conflict, I think, that never got away was the communists in Hollywood, all these leftists. There was a scene in the movie where, in the beginning of the movie, when Ronald Reagan's with his first wife, and he's talking to some Hollywood writers, and they're basically still in charge of the propaganda, even back then, this communist propaganda in Hollywood. There's also, I forget his first name, but McCarthy, the guy who was hunting the commies in Hollywood and in the universities, I believe. He was right the whole time. McCarthy was right about the Red Scare or whatever they called it back then. These commies were out there and they're still out here. Look how terrible our country is today because of all the commies in Hollywood and in the universities and just increasingly becoming, it was a carcinogen and now it's just become cancer, the way they've infiltrated our country. A lot of things in the movie, because these are based on real events, bring to mind things I've studied about communists, watching interviews with Yuri Bezmenov, reading the book from Manning Johnson, Color, Communism, and Common Sense, The Broken Cross by Piers Compton. War is generational. The conflict for ideas is eternal. That's why they included that famous quote in the movie, "Freedom is only one generation away from extinction." Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I had watched an interview with her, and she had also said how our freedoms are something that must be fought for eternally. There is no end to protecting your freedom. And war changes, becomes more sophisticated. We are in a war that's kind of like a pincer movement, where it's kind of coming from multiple directions. We got economic war, cultural war, lawfare. I would say right now, it's not a hot war, but after watching the movie, it's one of those things where it has me thinking, wow, this war never really ended. You know, World War II, the Nazis lost. They moved to Argentina. We brought them over here. They started NASA. Some of the Russians took them and they did their own space rocket, nuclear, whatever it is that they do out there. They're probably the only losers of World War II. But the battle with the communists seems to be the more important battle that we never finished, because they're still here. In the film, they also go into a short period of time when Ronald Reagan was fighting the communists in the Hollywood unions. And it's funny because the unions are striking for a lot of different things today as well. So the battle with the unions never ends either. But I think the communists kind of won. With the unions are in general kind of a communist idea anyways. We'd be better off without the unions, in my personal opinion. But that's coming from an anarchist. So a union is kind of against my ideological perspective to begin with. All in all, though, there's a lot of strong storytelling in this movie that's told in bite-sized bits and through motion graphics, which is something I really, really enjoyed. The motion graphics in this movie were probably like my favorite thing about the storytelling, because they took a lot of information and used this motion graphics approach to tell these large bits of information in bite-sized chunks. A while back, years ago, when me and I believe my little brother, we went to go watch the Tupac biopic. This was after the NWA biopic. The Tupac biopic, it's like they took the same approach for telling the story. It's just that the Tupac biopic was so unorganized in its structure that it was really hard to follow, and really you could not appreciate the story of Tupac because of the structure of these stories that were being told in such a way that were not. It's like if you read the Wikipedia page on Tupac and then someone made a film based on of all these random bits written into the Wikipedia page, and they were just trying to cram in as much of the Wikipedia articles as possible and didn't really develop an overall story for Tupac. That was the problem with the Tupac biopic. Whereas I feel like in the Reagan film, they took that same approach, but there was an actual structure to the storytelling, even though they were jumping back, in time a few places throughout the film. But it was relevant when they would jump back in time to give the audience why this past moment in Reagan's life was applicable to the current moment that they were telling in the story. They also cover in a short motion graphics segment the failures of Ronald Reagan, which was AIDS and the war on drugs, the Just Say No slogan. The AIDS part, I guess I would attribute more to Anthony Fauci, but the war on drugs is a war that cannot be won. It's more than just removing drugs or penalizing people for doing drugs. That's a cultural war issue right there. The war on drugs needs to be won through the culture. People need a reason to be involved in their community. People need a community to even be involved in a community. And right now in America, we don't have strong American community. As a nation, we don't have anything homogenous about us, which is why we're so divided. You go to countries like Japan or Korea. When a country is homogenous, you're probably going to have less problems like drugs and the need for a war on drugs. When there's people to look after each other, people who share the same beliefs, speak the same language, it's not really a problem you're going to have. One thing I did learn about Reagan from this movie is that he suffered party exile like a lot of people do today. I didn't know he was a former Democrat. I guess that should have made sense if he was in California. But he had a line in the movie, something about like Democrats are the party that left. I didn't leave the Democrats, the Democrats left me. So basically like the party changed. It's similar to what I hear today. People would say, I didn't change, the party changed, basically. I never changed my beliefs. It's just that this political party, the Democratic Party, has changed so radically that I'm no longer a part of it because of the change that they've gone through. I'm still the same. I still hold the same beliefs. Yeah, I also didn't know that Reagan suffered from Alzheimer's towards the end of his life. So that was pretty sad to see, but it's part of life. Towards the end of the film, after you've learned so much about Ronald Reagan, and he's going for his last ride into the sunset, and this is his goodbye because he's basically going to struggle with these Alzheimer's until he dies. They do have this cover of Take Me Home Country Roads. That song really just hits at the heartstrings if done with good storytelling, which I believe this movie did do. Just like in Logan Lucky, Steven Soderbergh movie, they also had the Country Roads song, but it's also just, that song is so powerful with a very good, well-told story. That song, pulls at the heartstrings. When I watched Logan Lucky too, when the daughter sings the song for her pageant or whatever. But yeah, it's a good song. It's a song I didn't think I would like as much as I do now. I think it's because of Logan Lucky that I really became a fan of that song, and the way they used it in Reagan, the cover at least, kind of reinforced my admiration for the song. So, Take Me Home, Country Roads, you have a special place in my heart for good stories. To wrap up the film, during the credits they show a lot of a montage of pictures depicting the real life events which were retold in the film, but it shows the actual pictures of Ronald Reagan in all these situations. The real Ronald Reagan, not the Dennis Quaid actor Ronald Reagan. They show the real life events during the credits, and kind of really brings the whole movie together, I think. I thought it was really fitting to have that slideshow playing with the credits at the end of the film after watching all those events happen. And Dennis Quaid was good, man. I don't remember when's the last time I saw Dennis Quaid in a movie, but he was fantastic. And there was a lot of actors in the film who I recognized, but I just don't know their names. But everyone in the film did pretty good. The prosthetics were very noticeable. It didn't take me out of the movie, but it was noticeable. Jon Voight is a treasure. Jon Voight was so good in this film. He serves as a narrator. He plays a commie, a former KGB spy. I don't know if this character was a real-life KGB spy or if this was just a narrative tool. But the way that they had him, he's basically did all this research on Reagan, and he was the narrator for the film. And he was talking to this young Russian military man. But yeah, Jon Voight's part in this film, I'm just assuming is probably just a made-up character. Probably didn't really exist in real life. It was just a narrative storytelling tool to have, which I thought was clever, having Jon Voight be the narrator of the film in the form of a former KGB spy who had to follow Ronald Reagan's life, basically, to keep the Russians informed about their American enemies, us. It's funny because it's Jon Voight. So the way, and in the way he's narrating, it almost seems like, yeah, it's his job to be a spy and to know everything he has to know about Ronald Reagan, but he also comes off as a fanboy, which was kind of hilarious. In the beginning of this, when I got to the theater, there was this trailer for some kind of documentary. It's not even a documentary, it's like a speculative, it's hard to call this a documentary. It's more like, the preview was about Abraham Lincoln being gay. And it was just so ludicrous. It's people just grabbing at anything they can to try as hard as they can to portray the real life Abraham Lincoln as a homosexual. I couldn't believe it. It was just so bizarre. I was like, wow, you guys are really desperate to make everything gay, even like historical figures. And the way that they go back into history, in the preview at least, to try to reinterpret letters or pictures or anything they could find to confirm that Abraham Lincoln is gay is just such an extraordinary exercise in manipulation and propaganda. It was just it's absurd. I think there might have only been like 10 people in the theater, and I was probably the youngest person there. Everyone else looked like they were in their 60s or something like that, 50s or 60s. So there was a lot of senior citizens in the film. Basically, not a lot because it was only 10 of us, but I was the only person there that was not a senior citizen. So I wonder, when I get to my 60s or 70s, there's already been movies made on Trump, but I wonder if there will ever be a film made about Trump that gives him a fair shake, you know what I'm saying? Or is it going to be some commie propaganda like this Abraham Lincoln homosexual documentary that was previewed in the theater before the Ronald Reagan movie screened? This is Kino Convo with G-Plex. Follow us on Twitter at G-Plex_MP4. or on Instagram at ghettoplex.mp4 or on YouTube at Ghettoplex. All right, that pretty much wraps it up for my review. But yeah, if you guys saw it, I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments below.